Let's turn and talk briefly about Orthodox Christianity. What's been going on in Orthodox Christianity? Well, we mentioned that with the fall of communism, there were a number of great changes that took place in Orthodox Christianity. The increased presence. But there have been some changes in other aspects as well. Specifically in thinking about the patriarchates, right? These regional areas of control under a patriarch. Now, traditionally, there have been the four. Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem have all been looked upon as great patriarchates from the ancient church, and these are still present. And of these, Constantinople is usually regarded more highly. But then you have patriarchates in Russia and Greece and Romania. There are 8 others as well. And a lot of this reflects the different approach to leadership within Orthodoxy than in Catholicism. Furthermore, there is also, so you have the patriarchates, but then you have other types of churches. There are some churches that are referred to as autocephalous. Essentially, they are churches that are self-governed and have its own patriarch, but they don't have a patriarchy. There are other churches which are autonomous. They are relatively self-governed, but they are largely connected to sponsor churches that usually have some authority. And so it's kind of like this church was started by the church in Moscow, and so it's autonomous. They let them go their own way, but there's still a little bit of a connection there as far as leadership goes. And so that has led to different things, as the churches are connected but also disconnected. There have been other challenges to Orthodoxy as well. Most Orthodox Christians tend to be in Europe, and Europe has been growing more secular. And because Orthodox Christianity has been so connected to European culture, it's been declining throughout the 20th century, numbers of people. And so it appears that that's going to be the continued case into the 21st century as well. Furthermore, in the churches that are dispersed, right, and so that have immigrated to other places, they often maintain their ethnic ties. So the Russian Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church. So that often kind of impacts the ability to connect to others who aren't of the same ethnicity, right? If you're not Greek, you might be hesitant to go to the Greek Orthodox Church. Some conversions do occur, sometimes through marriage or other things, but usually that ethnic boundary does keep some distance. Those kind of facets, the autocephaly, autonomy, the sponsoring church issue, presented themselves in important ways in the United States. The body in the United States, known as the Orthodox Church in America, is an extension of the Russian Orthodox Church. Right? And so you'll also see Greek Orthodox Church and Russian Orthodox Church, but there's this group known as the Orthodox Church in America. Right? We talked about this. Russia had sent missionaries into Alaska. They moved down into Washington, California, etc. And then there was immigration from other places. In 1970, the Moscow Patriarchate granted autonomous status to the Orthodox Church in America. At the same time, they tried to grant them autocephalous status. Right? Autonomous status is a sponsoring church, right? We kind of leave you alone, but there's that connection. Autocephalous is you're completely self-governed. Well, that decision has to be made at a church council. And so Moscow is kind of overstepping its authority. And so a lot of Orthodox Christians, especially Greeks, who were left out of this decision, were really upset by this. In addition, the Orthodox Church in America tried to unify all the Greeks, or not all the Greeks, but all the Orthodox, to claim to be the Orthodox Church of America. Right? As in, we're the only ones in America. And so that offended Greeks and other groups as well. Additionally, of course, the concern is Do you use the ethnic languages when you immigrate to the United States, or do you adopt English? You know, a lot of people continue to do their services in Russian, Greek, Slovak, which was a comfort to the immigrants, but also made them distinct from other Americans. And so often that second generation, you know, really kind of tried to separate themselves from that. Many Orthodox communities also have problems, at least in the West, maintaining a hold on their youth as they leave the Orthodox Church or maybe even Christianity altogether. One glimmer of hope for the Orthodox Church has been the interest that some Protestants have in Orthodoxy. Now, there's not a sizable number of evangelicals or Protestants becoming Orthodox Christians, but it's been enough that observers have taken note. So, what is it about Orthodoxy that becomes intriguing to Protestants? Well, one is its liturgy, the so-called high church style, where there's a lot of ceremony. And so that's also draws some people to Catholicism as well. The antiquity of the tradition, right? When you compare how old Protestantism is to the Orthodox Church, that's a long time, all right? There's a lot of difference. And so the antiquity of Orthodox Christianity, that historical continuity. Orthodoxy also appeals to people that like the kind of Catholic model, lower C Catholic, but don't like the strong institutionalism of Roman Catholicism. Ultimately, though, it may not be enough to make any sort of significant impact on Orthodoxy. Demographers suggest that although there are currently 200 million Orthodox Christians worldwide, the declining birth rates of Orthodox Christians, as well as the ethnic specificity, will continue to bring that total down over the next half century. Protestant Christianity. Protestantism suffers from similar problems in some places, the rise of secularism, these places that were traditional Christian strongholds that are becoming less and less religious. And so a lot of Protestants face similar challenges. Often some of these nations or people in Europe and other places are only tangentially Christian in some of their beliefs. Right? They might claim a Christian identity, but they're not really practicing. Right? They don't attend worship very well. For example, in the European state churches, right, many of the European nations still have a state church, right, the Church of Sweden, the Church of England. They claim high membership numbers, but in actuality, few people participate actively or on any sort of regular basis. One area of Protestantism that seems to be definitely on the decline, especially in Europe and the United States, is what is known as mainline Protestantism. Largely, this is the liberal Protestantism that we talked about in the 19th century and the 20th century. Mainline Protestants would include most Methodists, a sizable group of Presbyterians, Disciples of Christ, many Lutherans, Episcopalians, and certain Baptists, but not Southern Baptists. In many of these mainline churches, the membership tends to be older people. They're very formalized traditions. They're largely white, and they often tend to be more moderate in doctrine. So they're kind of more relativistic, which might turn some people off. A part of Protestantism that does seem to be growing rapidly is Pentecostalism. Pentecostals are very active in missions, and so they're going out there and sharing the message. The experiential component of Pentecostalism, where the Spirit is said to take over you, also appears to be appealing to some people. Pentecostalism also tends to be more connected with the lower classes. And so, in the global south and other places like that, where there's high amounts of poverty, people are drawn to some aspects of that. In addition, there also tend to be very charismatic leaders in Pentecostalism that draw people to them. And this is probably where we see the most development in the global South. Pentecostals account for 80 to 90% of the growth of Protestantism among traditionally Catholic Latin America. Right? So most of the growth is Pentecostalism. Go ahead, Aaron.
I think I heard of a ministry or TV show there. It's called Global Ventures.
No, I've not heard of it.
There's a TV you have a digital receiver. You get like 5 channels. One of them is geared more for people between the ages of like 15, 35 or something. So it's got music videos and things. Well, now and then there's this show that comes on at night on there called Global Ventures, and I think it's a group of Pentecostals. They go to these third world countries and some do miracles and then hands on people and say this person took them off, kind of lost, and see that and see, and it's even extremely convinced of what they're doing. I really wanted to kind of research it and see what all up with that. But young people go and get involved in this ministry and all these mission trips. There's one main guy that kind of he's the host of the TV show, seeing miracles and things and praying. It's interesting. It's kind of strange to watch, but you can see how firmly they believe in it.
Yeah, and it's that type of Christianity, and of course we might challenge how much of that is orthodox. But there's that kind of Christianity that's developing in the global South. And so Christianity, as we said, is no longer a European or North American religion. For example, the development of Pentecostalism, for example, more followers of the Assemblies of God, one of those Pentecostal denominations. There are more of them in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in the region right around there, than there are in the United States, even though the Assemblies of God started in the United States. And so people have referred to this development in the global South as the browning of Christianity. That there are more people of color in Christianity now than there are people of white or European descent. And so we talked and looked at those demographic changes just a little bit ago, and these huge gains developing in Christianity. It's estimated that by 2050, about half the number of Christians will be found in Africa and Latin America, and only about 1/5 of Christians will be non-Hispanic whites. Current projections also indicate that by 2050, 1 billion of the 3 billion Christians will be charismatic/Pentecostals. The growth occurring in Africa, Asia, and Latin America tends to be very, very conservative in doctrine, right? Believing in the inerrancy of the Bible, very conservative on moral issues like abortion and homosexuality, but also very open to supernaturalism. So why is Christianity, especially charismatic Christianity, growing in the global South? Well, Aaron addressed some of that, right? The healing and the experiential component of that. Many of these places are going through modernization, some of them in urbanization, economic challenges. And so there's that feeling of estrangement upon moving to the cities, and religion fills that gap. These religious communities provide alternatives for health, welfare, education that many of these governments often fail to provide. And so there's kind of this notion of there's this refuge during the times of great upheaval. And so while Protestantism is growing in the global South, there are changes occurring in the United States. And we'll close with thinking about where's evangelicalism going in the United States. A lot of younger evangelicals are starting to evidence the influence of postmodernism. While they still hold on to some truths, there is a relativism, a pluralism that is open, and there are quite a few younger evangelicals who are open to the possibility of other religions bringing people to God. Not a sizable group among younger evangelicals, but it's one example of that development. Younger evangelicals are also beginning to evidence a disaffection with church. The institutionalism, the formalism, the power struggles, the way in which the church often seems disconnected from the concerns of the world, that it's not making a significant impact in the world around it, is leading even younger evangelicals to question whether there's the necessity of the institutional church, or have turned to alternatives, some even to like house churches or other things, to try and have that communal connections, but also, kind of move away from the institutionalization. Younger evangelicals also evidence a disaffection with the political stance of Christianity in the recent time. The way in which a lot of evangelicalism has been so closely tied with the Republican political agenda. And so evangelicalism has become very politicized in the latter 20th century, early 21st century. So a lot of evangelicals that are in the millennial generation, still hold on to the similar types of doctrines, but don't like that it's become so politicized. We are also beginning to see a change in moral stance of a sizable group of younger evangelicals, with sizable groups being open to same-sex marriage, as being acceptable to God, living together before marriage also being acceptable, having sex before marriage, or all these kind of changes in moral stance that we're seeing among younger evangelicals. Again, a sizable group, but not everybody. But you begin to see some of these slight changes from some of the things that we've talked about before. So where is Christianity as we end this class here in 2015? Well, going in a variety of different directions depending on where you stand. If you stand in the global south as a Pentecostal, it looks like things are going well. If you stand in the global south as a Catholic, things seem to be going well. If you stand in Europe as, well, just about anything, things aren't going so well. I mean, there's still a sizable presence, but, Christianity, its cultural power, its adherents seem to be on decline, right? People aren't connecting with the church, aren't connecting doctrinally, aren't connecting at all. In the United States, well, it depends again on your kind of persuasion as far as institutional church versus non-institutional church, Catholic, Protestant, non-denominational, Pentecostalism growing, but some of these others on decline. But one of the things I think is clear for us is that we should never think we know exactly where all of this is going to go. I mean, if we thought that we knew where it was going to go sitting in the 2nd century, we would have thought this is not going anywhere. Or, there will never be a significant number of people who will be Christian. Because it's a minority, it's on the outskirts, it's marginalized, it's persecuted. But that's not what happened. If we'd have stood in the Middle Ages, we would have thought Christianity and its power, it's not going anywhere. Firmly, the Catholic Church has its hold. Well, within a few centuries that had changed. Within several centuries, completely lost its institutional power. So I don't think we can ever truly say where's the history of Christianity going. But in all of this, we've been looking at it from a ground level, because that's all we can do in history class is look at it from a ground level. I don't think we can ever fully say we completely know what God is doing. Or we could never limit God and say he can't bring a fantastic change, because he can always do that as well. So what does the future hold for Christianity? Who knows? I mean, as someone who believes in the second coming and that it could happen at any time, we may not get to 2015. But I think that what this does encourage us to do is, as Christians, take a look at our commitment, take a look at Scripture again, and find out what are those core things that we need to be teaching and practicing and living out. How can we share that with other people so that, at least in our corner of the world, whether that's here or whether that's abroad, we're doing what we can to spread God's kingdom. We'll end there. See everybody on Tuesday for the final. Again, if you have any questions between now and Tuesday,